What happens when war destroys the state? When state institutions are no longer able to provide what they used to provide, or what people think the state should provide, but people still need to eat, move, fight, and survive? In Ukraine, the answer is the black market. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, despite having taken Crimea already in 2014, the Ukrainian state was not prepared. Entire regions collapsed overnight. Supply chains broke down, government offices were evacuated, local officials fled or were captured, police disappeared, hospitals ran out of supplies, banks closed, supermarkets were empty, and in a matter of days, millions of people were suddenly on their own. Ukraine's formal institutions, the very ones designed to organize food, fuel, medicine, and safety during wartime, simply couldn't keep up. Even in areas far from the front lines, bureaucracies were overwhelmed, roads were blocked, fuel was rationed, the banking system became unstable, the Ukrainian currency plummeted in value, and of course, cash became scarce. And what was even worse, people had no way of knowing what would come next. This wasn't just a military crisis, it was a complete and obvious collapse of the state's perceived ability to manage daily life. And when that happens, well, people do what they've always done in times of chaos. They adapt, they trade, they hustle, they find a way. During the following months, black market activity in Ukraine exploded in occurrence and scope. But this isn't a story about crime, it's a story about survival. Because wherever the state, for whatever reason, stops doing things that it never should have been doing to begin with, freedom returns. Not just in the abstract ideological sense, but in the immediate practical one. Physical freedom. You don't ask for permission, you don't wait in line. Instead, you find someone who has what you need and you make a deal. In this moment, the Ukrainian state became largely irrelevant to the day-to-day survival of millions. And into that vacuum, the informal economy rushed in. Black markets, gray markets, barter networks, crypto donations, smuggling routes, all emerged not as threats to society, but as lifelines. They weren't perfect, but they worked. But how did we get here in the first place? Why was the Ukrainian state controlling food, fuel, and medicine at all? Now, in normal times, these things are produced and distributed by private businesses. Heavily regulated, but still private. But when the war began, everything changed. Russia bombed supply lines, blocked ports, and disrupted transport across the country. Roads were impassable, trains stopped, fuel became a strategic asset. As the chaos spread, Ukraine's government stepped in, centralizing supply chains, prioritizing the military, and regulating essential goods. It redirected humanitarian aid, rationed fuel, and took control of medicine distribution. Of course, it didn't create any of these goods. It just tried to control them. And that is what modern states do in crisis. They assume responsibility not for production, but for logistics. And like most states in crisis, or like most states trying to engage in any degree of central planning in general, it quickly found itself overwhelmed. But when state systems fail, markets allow people to adapt. In Ukraine, as government logistics broke down, the gray and black markets stepped in. Fuel, medicine, electronics, currency, whatever was needed, found a way to move. Some of it was smuggled, some traded quietly in basements or back alleys, and some operated in plain sight in defiance of formal regulations but with the unspoken approval of everyone who relied on it. Let's start with fuel. After the war began, Ukraine lost over 90% of its domestic oil refining capacity almost instantly. The country became dependent on fuel imports, mostly from Poland, Romania, and Hungary. But while government convoys struggled to deliver to the front, an alternative supply chain emerged. Thousands of individuals, small drivers, independent truckers, began importing fuel across informal routes. They sold it at higher prices, yes, but they sold it. And unlike state-run stations, they had stock. Next came medicine. With hospitals overwhelmed and state procurement systems jammed with paperwork and corruption, because yes, Ukraine is a pretty corrupt country in general, many Ukrainians turned to informal channels. Telegram groups connected buyers and sellers across the country. Volunteers brought supplies in through Poland and Moldova using personal contacts rather than state licensing. Antibiotics, insulin, trauma kits, all available for a price. Was it legal? No. Was it moral? Well, since there was no victim, no people had their freedom violated, then yes. But the most important question was, of course, was it necessary? Because the thing is, when your child needs insulin and the hospital has none, then the law becomes pretty irrelevant. Then there's currency. In the early weeks of the invasion, ATMs ran out of cash. Many banks froze transactions. In some occupied areas, the Ukrainian currency collapsed altogether. So people turned to US dollars, Polish zloty, Bitcoin, and even barter. Crypto donations, mostly in Bitcoin and Ethereum, became a key source of liquidity liquidity for volunteers and even military units. The Ukrainian government's official stance on crypto was murky, but when the state needed help, it stopped asking questions. Volunteers supplied body armor, drones, tactical radios, all sourced through international contacts, shipped unofficially and distributed through black or gray market networks. Now the thing is, this wasn't just faster than state delivery. It was often the only option. And this is the free market in wartime, and in any other scenario for that matter. From fuel and food to phones and helmets, Ukraine's informal economy kept people alive. It didn't require orders, it didn't require bureaucracy. It just needed freedom. Freedom to act, freedom to trade, freedom for individuals to solve their own problems. And in the ruins of formal institutions, that freedom became the key to the resilience of Ukrainian citizens. Now the black market is often portrayed as a place of exploitation, hoarding or crime. But in reality, it often occurs as a natural response to the failure of the state. Remember that black markets are only called black because the state deems them illegal. When institutions collapse, people don't wait for rescue. They act, they trade, they do whatever they need to do. This is what libertarians call spontaneous order. It's not planned or controlled. It's simply what happens when free individuals are left to solve problems on their own. Prices emerge, supply chains form, reputation becomes currency. In place of red tape and ration books, you get incentives, risk-taking and solutions. The economist Friedrich Hayek called this the knowledge problem. No government planner can ever have enough information to allocate resources efficiently. But individuals pursuing their interests through free markets solve this in real time. And that's exactly what happened in Ukraine. The state couldn't plan fast enough, but the people could adapt faster. And more than just efficient, these markets were moral because they were voluntary. No one forced anyone to trade. No one was coerced into giving up their goods. There was no central decree, just need and trust. It was relatively peaceful, even in the middle of war. Compare that to the alternative. Government command systems, rationing, corruption and favoritism. While state hospitals turned people away, informal medicine networks saved lives. While official fuel stations stood empty, smugglers kept ambulances moving. While currency collapsed, crypto gave families a way to buy food from across borders. It wasn't perfect, there were risks. There were bad actors, there was crime, and there was violence. And that remains a risk wherever or whenever the government fails at its primary task, namely to protect the freedom of its citizens. What matters is that these informal markets succeeded where official systems failed, not because they were regulated, but because they were free. Now, governments often have a strange relationship with black markets. Publicly, they condemn them, labeling them illegal, immoral, or dangerous. Privately, they often tolerate them. Sometimes they even depend on them. And this is, by the way, true for even totalitarian regimes that have often been explicitly and aggressively anti-black market. Nazi Germany, though black market trade was punishable by death, relied heavily on such markets during World War II as the German rationing system broke down. The USSR never functioned without a black market. Black market food, smuggled in Western goods, and foreign currency were crucial in everyday life, especially in the Brezhnev stagnation era. And wartime Ukraine is no exception. In the early months of the war, government spokespeople warned against hoarding, price gouging, and unlicensed trade. Yet at the same time, volunteers were buying fuel from smugglers and distributing medicine through grey market routes, and pretty much no one stopped them. Because without these networks, the war effort would have stalled. Even crypto, officially unregulated and legally ambiguous, was used to fund pretty much everything from humanitarian aid to military gear. The government, realizing this, eventually created official crypto donation channels. But the infrastructure, well, that came first from the free market. This is the hypocrisy of central power. They demonize freedom when they control the system and embrace it when they can't. When black markets empower ordinary people, they are called dangerous. But when they empower the state, they're quietly welcomed. And this isn't unique to Ukraine. During World War II, Allied governments railed against the black market, while their own officers bartered for cigarettes and chocolate. In Venezuela, the regime cracked down on illegal trade, while insiders exploited those very networks for personal gain. In truth, the black market is often not at all a threat to society. Instead, it's a threat to state control over society. And that's exactly why free markets work in general. Because they minimize the knowledge problem. Because they make for a more flexible and adaptable society. Because freedom allows individuals to react to change on their own accord. Because it demonstrates exactly why the state should have nothing to do with regulating markets or providing welfare. Two things without which most public employees and government officials would be out of a job. War brings devastation. It tears apart the structures we're told we can't live without. Governments fall back, institutions collapse. And yet people endure if they are free to do so. An individual seeking to pursue his own perceived interest through trade, through cooperation, shouldn't need to wait for orders. And he or she should not need to ask for permission. The human drive to survive and prosper doesn't need the government's permission. It finds a way. In Ukraine, the black market is not a symbol of disorder. It's a symbol of spontaneous order. A reminder that people are capable of organizing themselves, even or maybe especially when the state disappears. It was the market, not the ministry, that kept food moving. It was reputation, not regulation, that kept people honest. And it is freedom, not force, that is getting the Ukrainian people through the darkest of days. Combine that with a state that actually functions and does the one thing it was meant to do, use retaliatory force to protect the freedom of its citizens, and you will see any society prosper. You will see any group of people ready to adapt to changes. When the missiles are flying over their heads, when the cities are turning into dust all around them, the individual will endure if he is allowed to do what he needs to do. So the next time somebody tries to convince you that the state apparatus is the only thing that holds society together, remember Ukraine and remember the black market, which along with the stamina and the bravery of its soldiers is keeping it alive.